Well, this isn't college, so we're not going to give the college 15. So it's a little after 6. And for those of you who are here on time, and our speakers are ready to go, so we're just going to kick everything off. And I just want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. I have been involved in this topic for over a year and following a lot of these people on the stage, and I'm super excited to have them here. Some have traveled from Florida, some have traveled from Wisconsin, and this is just a really amazing opportunity for our little township of Augusta and for those that are around the area to listen to these subject matter experts talk. And feel free to take notes. There's going to be an opportunity for questions at the end of the presentations. With that, I would like to invite Pastor Chris up to the stage. Without him allowing us to use this space, it wouldn't have been possible. And here he is. Thank you.
I'll just take a minute of your time. On behalf of the congregation, I want to welcome all of you here tonight and to thank you for caring about our community. Thanks also to our panelists, our sponsors, Robert and Melissa Zimmerman, and to all of those who worked really hard to put this on tonight. Tonight's topic is a fraught one. I suspect every opinion here is different from the next. So I pray that we will all keep open, critical minds in the spirit of charity. I'm not here to promote myself or sell you anything, but I would be remiss if I didn't say a little something about the wonderful people in this congregation. Lincoln Community United Methodist Church is a warm and friendly congregation with many opportunities to volunteer as we reach out to our neighbors with love. For example, one of our young adults, Meghan C., leads the congregation each month in packing 200 sack lunches for hungry people in our community. We seek to foster spirituality, serve with the poor, and cultivate peace and justice. If you're looking for a faith community or just more opportunities to do some good, I hope you'll consider joining us some Sunday at 10 a.m. There's a table in the narthex with some information about our church and our denomination stances on various issues. I'd be glad to talk with you at any point or answer any questions you might have. And lastly, I just want to say all are welcome here. And in this church, all means all. Thank you all.
I'm working up to professional status here, still amateur. Without further ado, our MC for the evening is Mr. Tim Bruneau. Tim, I met through the fight in this AI hyperscale data center issue. He lives in Saline Township, and him and his wife Tammy are leading the charge there in trying to get the best outcome for the residents of the township that they can, knowing that their hyperscale data center has already begun well into their construction. So, Tim, thanks for showing up tonight, and I know you'll be a fabulous MC.
Let's give a big round of applause for Wendy. What an amazing event she's put on for us tonight. This panel here is going to blow your mind. And also, can I get another shout out for the Lincoln Community Methodist Church for hosting the event tonight? And a very special thanks to Robert F. and Melissa F. Zimmerman Family Foundation. This event couldn't have happened without them. And one more thunderous round of applause for me. So now I'm just kidding. Actually, the thunderous round of applause should be for you. You've all come here today to learn, to experience from everyone's experience. I've experienced these people, I've experienced, you have experienced. Our shared knowledge is what can help us defeat these things. And to that end, to help try to defeat these things, my wife and I created the Rural Michigan Defense Foundation, Rural Michigan Defense Fund, I should probably say it right. The attempt is to raise money to help rural communities with little resources fight off billionaire companies and try to defeat them in court and otherwise. So, one order of business, as there will be question and answer at the end of the, after all the speakers speak. We're not going to do it after each one. And you'll get 3 minutes, and please keep them to a non-political nature. Just kind of like stick to the facts. Okay? So without further ado, our first speaker is Gwen Klenke. Gwen brings expertise in environmental justice and geospatial analysis with a special focus on land use and energy impacts. She's been working across the Midwest to map and analyze the effects of large-scale industrial projects. Her insights will help us understand the energy demand and who ultimately pays for it. Let's give a big round of applause for Gwen.
Hey folks, bear with me for 1 second while I get this screen up and running. Give it a second. We're almost there, folks. Hold on. Okay. I am going to talk to y'all today about energy, which is honestly probably one of the things that you know the most about related to data centers. Obviously, as Tim said, my name is Gwen. I'm the Midwest Program Coordinator for an organization called Frac Tracker Alliance. Generally, our day-to-day work is mapping and analyzing oil and gas data, but we got into this work because a few years ago, we were actually tracking Bitcoin and crypto mining facilities. We were really concerned about the energy impact of those facilities, and little did we know it was going to be a precursor to these hyperscale AI data centers, which is just how we got into this work. So to start with a little level setting, there's kind of this lingering question of, okay, why are we talking about these hyperscale AI data centers now? And the reason is that, previously, even, 3 years ago, data centers were much less of a big deal. We used them, for things like internet and our phones, but they weren't performing, as high computational functions as they are now. They weren't processing the amount of data that they are now. AI workloads, and again, just the amount of information it's processing, requires this really constant, high-density computing that runs like 24/7. And for folks to have this, kind of communication with AI, or for AI to have, this level of data processing, it takes a lot more energy. And unfortunately, local grids are really not built to support anything of this size. So tech firms are really, really racing to find any power that they can. They're connecting to, grids like they are here in Michigan, trying to get into DTE's grid. There's been examples of like Microsoft helping to bring nuclear power plants back online just to get enough power for their data center. And in some places like Minnesota, some companies are bringing renewables with them. So this energy supply, really is one of the main things that shapes where these facilities can pop up, because they're not the same little itty-bitty ones that they were before. So like I said, electric demand can determine where these data centers exist, but it's not just electric demand, right? In this little video clip, if it runs, it's not going to look great. We can see we're looking at the data center that was proposed here, the Thor Equities data center. And in a second, you'll see a bunch of small triangles pop up, and those are all power generating facilities of various natures. And you can see that in Southeast Michigan, there's a lot of them. That's where folks want the data centers because it's near the power sources. But not just the power sources. Transmission lines are obviously another very important aspect. And you'll see that all of the data centers in Southeast Michigan are very near these transmission lines. So there's, just a couple different things that kind of play into getting energy to these big facilities. The one other thing that I'll mention is a lot of these hyperscale AI data centers come with backup generators that are often diesel backup generators. Things like transmission infrastructure, that's going to be owned by grid operators, so DTE in this case. But the things like backup generators are typically owned and operated by the data center themselves. I'm bringing up these diesel backup generators because you might have heard about Elon Musk's Grok XAI facility in Memphis. This facility was not getting the power that it wanted or needed from the grid. And so, this is a pending case right now, so I want to be careful with my words. But essentially, they were not getting the power that they needed, so they turned on all of their gas generators, which immediately started polluting the nearby community. In Michigan, we have this kind of blanket emergency designation, and what I mean by that is if the power were to go out, these data centers are allowed to run those generators 24/7 until the power is back online. It's just very, very dirty, very noisy. Just think of your neighbor's generator when the power goes out by times 1,000. Speaking of your neighbor's generator, I don't know how many folks have been on DTE's grid for a while. I know I have. And in recent years, I've noticed increases in outages and they last longer. So what I'm getting at here is those diesel backup generators are not just arbitrary backup. They will probably turn on at some point and pollute our communities, which is a really big bummer. I also just wanted to take a second and talk about DTE's data center pipeline. So a lot of DTE's mix right now of energy, of electric, is actually coming from coal. So we all get our electricity, but about 40% of that comes from coal generating power plants. I think the next highest level is natural gas, and then nuclear, and then renewables on the tail end. And why I'm bringing this up is because Selene's data center is, projected to increase our collective peak load by 25%, and that's just one of 8 data centers that they have in their pipeline. So there's this really big scale mismatch, right? The demand of all of these data centers really exceeds what our grid was meant to handle. All right, we're going to watch one other quick video if it wants to load. So again, these are the data centers that are all on DTE's grid. You can see there's about 8 of them. And like I mentioned, there's really not enough power for them. So I'm kind of throwing around a couple numbers here, bear with me. The Selene data center is reported to use 1.4 gigawatts of power, and I know that it's kind of hard to think about what 1.4 means. That's roughly the energy of a city the size of Orlando, Florida, and that's just for one data center. We would need, if we said yes to all 8 of those data centers, even more power. I'll say about a year ago, it was reported by Inside Climate News that DTE was looking to add roughly 7 gigawatts of capacity. So again, we're talking roughly 7, maybe a little bit less, 7 Orlandos that we need to build power for, essentially, that we don't have. It's not just a DTE problem, it's also a consumer's energy problem. So, right now, on DTE's grid, our electric capacity, so how much energy we have, is around 11 gigawatts. On our hottest day of the year, when everyone's running their AC, everyone's using up all their energy, we use around 9.5 gigawatts. So we've got about 1.5 gigawatts extra, right? But unfortunately, the data center demand, like I said, is 7 gigawatts. So we're not going to have enough power for all of us and for the data centers. It's a similar story with consumers. They have electric capacity of around 7.5 gigawatts. They use 7 on their hottest day, but they projected a couple months ago about 15 gigawatts of data center demand. So again, what I'm just trying to hammer home here is that the current demand is already approaching capacity before we even bring data centers into the picture. Unfortunately, oftentimes when we talk about increasing power generation, the costs and risks tend to be shifted onto you and I as residential ratepayers. And this is just because of the way we structure utilities in this state. Utilities are not the same in every state, but many have what we have, which is called investor-owned utilities. They're regulated monopolies, so typically what happens is if DTE does something, say they build a new power plant because there's a new subdivision who needs power, they will then go ask the Michigan Public Service Commission, hey, we just did all this, we spent all this money, we're given more power, can you approve a rate increase so we get paid back for that? There's 2 types of costs, though, that utilities bear. The first is operating costs, and this is very simple, things like salaries for employees or things like the DTE trucks you see trimming trees. But the capital investments, that is like really, really big investments in really, really large things, so transmission line, power generating facilities, anything like that, they can claim the cost back plus a little bit extra. The argument is, oh, we as DTE invested in this new power for everyone, so everyone can pay us back for it, plus a little bit of interest because we did all the work. But what this does is it essentially incentivizes corporate utilities to build more, right? Because if they add in another power generating facility, they can ask the Public Service Commission to be paid back for that. So these data centers are kind of a gold mine for them, right? Because they can say, oh, look, we need to build so much more because there's so much power needed. I will note that when the Michigan Sales and Use Tax was passed, the thing that kind of brought a lot of data centers to the state, there was some language in there that said something to the effect of, if there are large investments needed to energy, that it won't be passed down to residential ratepayers. But unfortunately, there was no enforcement mechanism behind that. So it was just kind of like written on the paper, and there's no real protection for residential ratepayers like you or I. This also becomes an issue when we think about transparency. If we're being really generous, I think we can say, really generous, I think we can say the Michigan Public Service Commission is trying to set fair rates. But yeah, thank you. But the thing is that utilities always know more about their own systems than the Michigan Public Service Commission knows about their own systems. They know how much energy all 8 of the data center proposals in their service area need. They know what's necessary in terms of grid improvement. They also know what's extra in terms of grid improvement. But like I said, they're really incentivized to do more because they can collect back more. I'll also just add in here that obviously when we're talking about DTE and consumers, these are two very large corporations that have a lot of money and a lot of people behind them. So when they ask for rate increases from the Michigan Public Service Commission, it's not just some person walking up and asking. They've been pushing and pushing and pushing for it with all of their money. Additionally, I'll just throw in that big tech often keeps quiet about what they're doing because, they're competing against one another. So we have just all of these issues with transparency. And the problem is that when we don't have transparency, small communities are asked to make a decision without key information. I know here in Augusta Township, the data center fight is well into things. I know y'all have a recall coming up sometime soon, a recall vote. And maybe you've already asked some of these questions about projected energy demand, about who pays for transmission upgrades, about what limits on backup generators may be. But I would really encourage folks to go out to other data center fights that are on the same grid, listen to those as well, and make sure that you're asking these questions there, because unfortunately, the way this is going to work is that if there's any hyperscale AI data centers, all of us as residential ratepayers will bear the costs. So it's really important to, link up with your neighbors, even if it's a little ways away. Head out to a Lyon Township meeting, head out to an IPSI meeting, and listen in on what's happening there so you can protect your community, but also be aligned with everyone. So I threw a couple flyers at the back at one of the tables. I'll be around later for questions. But again, I just really appreciate everyone being here, and again, would encourage y'all to be at any other data center meetings that you can be. Thanks. Let me just hit the X button. Okay, I think Prescott should be set up.
All right, let's give it up again for Gwen. The last thing she said really struck me because I know a bunch of people out here, and they're all from different communities, and we've all been to each other's fights. We've been to Dundee, we've been to Lyon, we've been to Frenchtown, we've been to Berlin, and everywhere in between. So that's the truth. That's the gospel right there. So our next speaker is coming up is called, well, I guess he's called that, but he's also named Preston Balch. He comes with 38 years in managing large-scale software and financial systems in the banking sector. His valuable experience in financial oversight and strategies for mitigating financial risks. He played an important role in stopping Microsoft's proposed data center in Caledonia, Wisconsin. Please give it up for Prescott.
Slideshow button, and then from beginning.
Cool. Yeah, so the tagline there, don't trust anyone who claims it's only one or the other, is I could end my presentation there. There are an awful lot, it's a very polarizing discussion. And I want to be fair. I'm a technology professional. I made a really good living using data centers. I'd be a hypocrite if I said we should never build another one now that I'm retired. There have to be some rewards or people wouldn't be thinking that it was a good thing to do. There obviously also have to be risks. And I just want to try to lay out a balanced view from the perspective of somebody that was in the industry. So who am I? I'm a retired technology executive. I worked 38 years at a very large bank. I think we need data centers. It's where they belong. That's the problem. And I don't think they belong in small communities, and I'll explain why. I'm also, probably most importantly on this slide, a spoiler of rescued animals. And I have zero conflicts of interest. So no one can deny the benefit that when you build $1 billion building, that you're going to get both some eye-watering tax revenue, and the smaller the community, the more eye-watering it's going to be because it's such a big number. You're going to get abundant construction jobs for years on end. There's another edge to that sword too, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And you're going to get some indirect economic benefit of construction. There are studies that show that there are not net new jobs being created in construction, that they're simply moving around. But if you're a municipal official, you want those construction jobs in your community and you want that economic benefit. It is temporary, can be multiple years if the construction schedule lasts for a really long time. But you have to admit, yeah, there are going to be a whole bunch of people in our community that wouldn't otherwise be there, and they will shop in our stores and drive up rents. That's another problem. But putting that aside, so let's talk about some of the myths that I hear when I hear tech companies and developers talk about benefits. First one is direct jobs. I've seen some wildly outlandish claims. So what did I do? I'm a data guy. I went out and got some data from Northern Virginia. Obviously a statistically significant sample size. It's Data Center Alley. 565 facilities, 10,420 direct jobs. You do the math on that, and it's about 20 per building. So if somebody's proposing 10 buildings here, then if the number is more than 200, you ask them, why are your data centers so much less efficiently managed than the ones in Northern Virginia? I think in some fairness, the hyperscale data centers might have slightly more per building, but I will remind everybody that the technology industry exists for the purpose of automating human activity. Whatever they start with is going to be the max. They are not going to get less efficient over time. They're going to get more efficient, and they're going to drive that number down because that's what the technology industry does. As for indirect economic benefit, I'll just point you to the map. That is a map of West Des Moines, Iowa, which is actually quite a booming place. But in the immediate vicinity of the data center construction, which has been going on now for 15 years, there's nothing. There's a golf course across the street. All of the economic development is someplace else. So if somebody comes and argues, if we put this data center here, when we put all the municipal infrastructure there, that will allow all of the immediate vicinity land to be developable. Well, if that were the case, why does this pattern repeat in all of the small communities that I've seen? Take your pick. Go look at datacentermap.com, find some data centers, go do this math. Go do this mapping. I can't find communities where there's been a huge amount of geographically centered around the data center development. It just doesn't happen. And I think partly for that reason, the reason is it drives up the property values of land around the data center, and it prices out everything but other data centers. So another problem or risk here that is often overlooked, that I think is maybe the deal killer for a small town, it's financial concentration. And as residents of the state of Michigan, you all know this problem really well. If you have one taxpayer in one industry in your town providing that much tax revenue, when something happens to that one taxpayer or that one industry, you have a real problem on your hands. And your current taxpayers are the ones that are left holding the bag. That's Port Washington, Wisconsin, and the blue slice is how much the data center is going to provide of their total tax revenue of that whole pie. If anything goes wrong, if they show up at City Hall and say, I'm disputing my valuation, I want my assessment to drop, if the industry hits a bump, any number of things can go wrong that take that number down. But because it's such a huge concentration, any substantive move in that valuation is going to fall right on the pocketbooks of the existing taxpayers on short notice. There's also a risk of the bubble bursting. I think almost everyone agrees there's a bubble in artificial intelligence. Those two circles are drawn to scale. The left bubble, small circle is the current size of the data center market before all the building began. And the circle on the right is to scale the currently proposed aggregate data center investment. There is no industry in the world that grows that fast without making a mess. It is overbuilding what may be everything will work out, but you're betting your community on it. Are you protected if something happens? If the bubble does burst and the construction stops midstream, if you only get one building out of 10, any number of scenarios, anything on that timeline happens, are you protected? If you want to do this, if you look at the risk and reward and you say the reward outweighs the risk, at a minimum, understand what those risks are and protect yourself against them. Tax breaks. Please don't do this. In the good old days, when tax breaks started, there was a hold your nose arrangement that we had. Somebody said, I can't build here because I've got to tear some building down. I've got some polluted land. I've got a whole bunch of costs that make it a non-starter for me as a private investor to do the work. So the city says, great, we'll help you out with some future tax abatement to make it economically viable. The city gets the blight removed. The developer gets a profitable project. You get tax benefit because eventually, as that abatement falls off the commitment, you start getting real tax revenue, and you get indirect economic benefit as well in the interim while you're waiting for that tax abatement to happen. So with data centers, what happened? Why did we give up on the right side of that page? Why we're doing this for some temporary construction jobs? We're doing it for 20 jobs per building. There's no indirect economic benefit of 20 jobs per building. Even the smallest communities can absorb that without any change to their economy at all. And there's no blighted property here. They're taking pristine farmland and just building. They're asking for tax abatement because they can, not because they need it. Microsoft back in January of this year, and I'll take a little bit of credit for punching them in the nose and telling them to go away. But they announced in January, look, we are going to be the leader here and not ask for any more tax abatement. So why isn't that true of all their competitors now too? We should hold all their competitors to that same standard. We had a deal in Wisconsin come up recently in Beaver Dam, subsequent to the big Meta deal. Little tiny developer comes along, wants to build a $72 million data center. The city agrees to it, but they said, you got to do better. You got to give us a better deal. They agreed to pay them $6.5 million against a $72 million building, cash, unrestricted funds for the city. We're turning the deals around to make them better for local communities. So at least if you're going to do it, get everything you can out of it. Communities don't realize how much leverage they have. And part of this public blowback is actually making the deals even more potentially favorable for the communities because they're desperate to build. So construction and zoning this is a warning page. Zoning almost exclusively focuses on permanent use of the building. And in this particular case, if you happen to live nearby one of these things, you will wait 7 to 10 years for the permanent use of the building to arrive. And your zoning will not take into consideration that construction burden that you have to live with for 7 to 10 years. That is not fair to the people that live nearby. It's not like somebody's building a home and 3 months worth of construction and you're done. 7 to 10 years, you have to bake that impact to residents into your zoning regulations with respect to these buildings. It is too unique. It's too different from construction to permanent use to just ignore the construction phase. So people often ask me, okay, you led with, we need these things somewhere. Finding the right place is the real question. So my answer is simple. 2 choices. 1, a municipality that can absorb a reduction in the tax revenue without unfairly impacting current residents. I put that at approximately 10% of total valuation. If you've got $1 billion worth of value in your town, your maximum data center should be $100 million. There are $1 billion per building at this point, so that sort of rules out a small town. I would prefer it to be less than 5 because then you don't notice if they even take a 20% haircut in their assessed value. You could also do this if you're desperate. There are communities across the country that have said, we got nothing going on, our biggest employer just left town, tax revenue's drying up, we got nothing, and these guys are offering a healthy tax revenue stream for some period of time. If you go into that eyes wide open, knowing what the risks are, more power to you. just don't go into that without at least assessing the risks and protecting yourself against some of those risks that I talked about. And lastly, I always conclude with a bunch of references and a contact email address. Feel free to reach out to me at any time. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Well, for anyone who knows what happened in Saline last week, I wish she would have been around a little sooner. So the next group coming up here is a group project. We have two speakers are going to come up together. Chris Gilmer-Hill is a policy manager at the Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition, where he focuses on state, local level environmental policy and community organizing. He has a background in software development and engineering. His partner is going to be Michelle Martinez, who's a CEAS graduate and was the inaugural director of the Tishman Center at the University of Michigan in 2022. Martinez has 20 years of experience practicing environmental justice in her hometown of Detroit. Most recently, she served as executive director of the Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition and is founding member of the coalition. Please welcome Michelle and Chris.
All right. We're going to do a little thing here, and while I try to plug in, I'm going to say, you know, I also got animals too. I've got a rescue pit bull. She's 70 pounds, and she's a snuggler. Yeah. 1,200 pit bulls? Oh. They don't snuggle. All right. I'll hand it to you. Or am I doing it?
I think your slides.
Okay, my slides up first. Okay, so again, I'm Michelle Martinez, and I live in Detroit, and I am glad to follow you, Prescott, because I think we have some agreement and some disagreement, which is good. We want to continue this, so let me put this on slideshow. And I need my paper. Okay, so my argument here actually is that data centers will put an additional risk onto Michigan residents that can indeed outweigh data center development. And if these stated benefits that we've talked about, right, where there's local revenue, property tax, jobs, that they don't actually address the scale of the risks that we're going to take on with data centers at a regional and at a national level. So, you know, I'm just going to put a little picture up while I talk. It's not a slide heavy presentation, but like Gwen said, data centers are on a grid, right? They demand 24-hour a day computing with very large loads inside of a regulated monopoly investor-owned utility. And that demand has already shown us that prolongment of a coal generating facility is online, the restarting of a nuclear plant in Michigan, and the expansion of fracked gas pipelines are all on the way. And this is because of the mass energy consumption demand at a national level. So Bank of America analysts forecast the United States will need more than 230 gigawatts of electricity generation capacity in 5 years, and that we actually only have 93 gigawatts in supply. So we're falling short of 100 gigawatts in the United States. And the fuel generation capacity of that is fossil fuels, mostly, 56% of it across the nation. In 2025 alone, national utilities requested $31 billion in rate increases across the United States. So this is not a small amount of money that we're paying as a nation to make sure that these upgrades actually happen. DTE, as was stated, has requested a $500 million rate increase just for our service territory this year, and that was immediately after raising rates $275 million. So we're looking at about an average of 10% bill increases every year. So the regulatory system, obviously, Michigan Public Service Commission is the decision maker on whether or not these rates being conferred on our bills and our households are actually going to be allocated fairly. Who's going to pay the cost of this? But simultaneously, we also have the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, who's deciding whether or not the grid infrastructure can meet the moment. While we have a presidential administration who's instructing FERC to fast track any plans and remove any regulatory barriers that would allow AI to deploy as fast as possible to meet the moment. So this fast tracking requires a balloon in outside risks that actually residents have to take on, sidestepping regulatory processes along the way, really depending on these loopholes and on non-disclosure agreements to be able to do that. So what I want to say is break down actually what these risks actually look like inside of the energy system, and it's kind of hard to read, so I'm gonna talk about them in detail. So as I said, data centers are not isolated. They exist within a complex energy system, and it's important to remember that they're operating in an environment of massive power disruptions already from climate change, right? Wildfire smoke that's happening is disrupting the grid, floods that are taking out poles and lines, right? When it gets really, really hot, we crank up our air conditioner. So all of these things that are happening simultaneously are already putting pressure on our energy grid, which needs upgrades. So these compounding risks of the speed and the fast tracking of the data centers is really what's beginning to hurt our decision-making processes. The markets themselves, global energy markets, are under enormous amount of pressure, including diesel, including gas, regional price volatility, supply chain issues that are happening at the grid level. Wholesale energy markets, which are set at the transmission level, are becoming more volatile in response to these supply and demands. The Ukrainian-Russian war, the attacks in Iran and Venezuela are all putting pressure on these global energy markets, making gas, making oil, and making fuels more expensive. And these are reflected in our energy costs. Whether or not we believe that data centers are compounding this risk as a baseline, we know energy is going up. The massive cost of building out this transmission and the build timeline is compounded by tariffs and inflation that can also impact our rates. So every single nut and bolt that is put into the energy system is conferred through our rate structures. So Public Utility Dive is reporting that there's even a 2 to 5 year delay on the raw materials to build out the infrastructure that would be necessary to enable this grid development. All of those costs are ballooning over that timeline and are put at risk when we're thinking about the bubble popping. So timeline matters because if a data center, for example, as Prescott outlined, says, okay, after year 3, we can't afford to operate anymore, will the residents of Michigan or across the grid infrastructure have to pay for the energy upgrades regardless of whether or not those data centers continue to exist? So in the regulatory proceedings that Chris will talk about, data centers may only be on the hook for 8 years or paying for 10 years or 12 years, and those are being decided by the Michigan Public Service Commission. But it is a race against that market bubble. Cost allocation is another piece that's really important to think about. Residents in Michigan are one rate class. As homeowners, we pay a certain rate, and it actually subsidizes industrial rates. We pay more than a big factory anywhere in the state, and that's been true for the last 20 years. The industrial rate class and the commercial rate class are priced separately. What we're fighting for is that data centers should be their own rate class. They should be subjected to and have to prove the necessity of their energy consumption, just like residents, and residents should not be made to pay for data center rate classes. Advocates maintain that their own rate classification would help understand the consumption rates at least, and we don't have that yet. So the hidden costs, I think, that are very important is that all of the data centers, as they continue to consume energy, they rely on the power structure. And the power structure itself produces pollution. So when we're increasing data centers, the pollution coming out of coal-fired power plants or out of fracked gas, whether that's carbon dioxide or methane, is polluting our community, but it's also putting pressure on our climate system. California researchers, for example, looked at additional healthcare costs associated with the pollution coming out of the power grid because of data centers and found that healthcare costs only associated with data center growth made healthcare costs triple in 3 years. So we're talking about actual respiratory health and other downstream impacts. So it's alarming on multiple fronts. Data centers are expected to increase energy usage at least 20% and climate emissions 13% in 4 years, and expend $6.7 trillion in investment across the entire value chain. So that means the data center, the power system, and then the original source materials that they need to then build out that entire system. And the White House has eliminated the use of climate change in any AI policy making. So we do know that electricity bills are spiking across the system, and it is contributing to an affordability crisis. MIT faculty members have found that the price of climate change is showing up in people's household bills, $1,000 a year annually, every year just now. I know I just paid for a bunch of air quality filters during the wildfires. I don't know if anybody else had to do that to make sure that their family was safe. But these risks across the entire system are not borne equally. And I think that's the most important thing that we need to talk about and why I have such a huge dog in the fight. You know, I do live in Detroit, and so I would say that, you know, it's not good here and it's not good in Detroit either. Because residential customers pay so much more in energy. There's also not different rate classes depending on how much you earn. So if rates go up 10% and you're spending, I don't know, $300 on your energy bill, but you only make $30,000 a year, you're paying a huge amount of money on your energy. And so the proportion of money that you're spending actually doesn't show up in the different rate classes. And that's something that other states have dealt with, right? You shouldn't ever pay more than 3% of your total income on an energy bill. But when we look at what is happening across the nation is that there's an energy shutoff crisis because people just simply cannot afford this build out. And in Michigan, we performed 4.3 million energy shutoffs in 2024 because people could not afford their bills. In Detroit, it was 50,000 shutoffs. And so no matter where the data center is, if we are conferring those in the rate structures, then we have to look at how it is impacting people in different places. This is a map of the energy shutoffs. That's Wayne County. I don't have one yet of Washtenaw County, but those yellow dots represent shutoffs. So we can begin to predict and imagine what it means when 50,000 shutoffs are occurring in a neighborhood or a city, what that will do to neighborhood stability, what that will do to neighborhood health, and the downstream impacts that that has on neighborhood continuity. So I think it's important, right, to think about the way that risks are conferred by data centers by $1 trillion industry on the residents of Michigan, the neighborhood continuity, and our health of the Great Lakes state. Lots of people have been writing about how utilities are shifting this cost onto us, onto our bill, but also onto our health, right? And the invisibilized ways that we are internalizing the cost through every breath that we take on this earth. So, we don't want to forget about climate change, even though it's fallen off the political table. The last thing I'll say is that right now, municipalities, townships don't really have the ability to have a say inside of the MPSC. Though they can become interveners, really only Ann Arbor is the only municipality that is an intervener in the state of Michigan. My Maui is another organization that represents townships and cities. But how do you cross that jurisdictional line as residents who have elected officials that can help to reduce some of these impacts at the township level when there's such a huge barrier? So just giving some solutions on the way out and handing it over to Chris to move to the next slide.
Yes, for sure. And thank you. And I'd like to, drill a bit into some of what Michelle just talked about in terms of specific impacts, but also something that Gwen brought up earlier tonight. So specifically, I want to look into this, one of the more frustrating things that many of us have heard in the course of these fights, which is that we often hear that we already have protections in state law. Specifically, we often hear that there are already protections around, preventing ratepayer impact, around air quality, around water usage, land usage, etc. So what I want to do is drill into what that actually looks like in the real world in a couple of specific examples. And specifically, the point I'd like to make is that not only do we not really have strong protections even theoretically in state law, but the protections that we do have are actively not being enforced, even as data center development is increasingly just a real thing that is actively happening. And the longer that we live in that sort of limbo, the longer we let these projects come into whether urban or rural areas without any sort of moratorium or real protections, the more we're going to see very real both economic and human health impacts. And so I'd like to start with this question of ratepayer protections. So as Gwen mentioned, there are lines in state law that should be protecting ratepayers. And specifically, there's a line in the state sales and use tax exemption for data centers, which says that data centers shall not be given a rate that is subsidized by other ratepayers. So in theory, these data centers aren't supposed to be paying less than their fair share. And in theory, if they're getting these tax exemptions, which across the board, these large projects are seeking these tax exemptions, they should not be paying less than what it would take to fully offset the costs of all that development. But I firstly would like to highlight this comes directly from the Michigan Public Service Commission. This is part of their release at the conclusion of what was called the data center tariff case, where they were in a contested case with Consumers Energy over on the other side of the state, looking at the extra amount that they should be charging data centers in order to account for that demand. And specifically here, they left a lot of these questions just off the table. So specifically, I want to flag, they did not establish specific cost allocation or rate case design, leaving these issues to be considered in general rate cases. So this question of cost allocation has been kicked down the road, even as we see data center development actively happening, and even as the MPSC has circumvented certain avenues of public input in order to get what's called ex parte approval without contested cases for data center rate proposals. This is, it's all in legalese, but this is something that is actively happening. The MPSC, in fairly plain language, has chosen to delay actually making these decisions about rate design and cost allocation. They've chosen to delay making the hard decisions about how we're going to make data centers pay their fair share, even as they're getting approvals and they're allowing these projects to move forward. And to put a little even further of a point on that, so this is a quote out from the Consumers Motion in Limine, which is a motion that Consumers Energy made in that rate case to attempt to limit the scope of what was going to be decided. And specifically here, they argued that they should not even consider evidence on a handful of things, including one, the development of a new rate for data centers, and second, the requirements for the data center to meet a Michigan sales tax exemption. And so here, in even plainer language, given that this is a successful motion, they essentially got what they asked for here. They claimed that in the consideration of how they should fairly charge data centers, they shouldn't even look at evidence about meeting those protections that are in the state sales tax law. And ultimately, that's what happened here. This is from the Attorney General's request for a rehearing after all of this was hashed out, after the commission made their final decision. And what we see is that, per the Attorney General's office's report, some portion of those transmission costs for such resources will entail a degree of cross-subsidization from other customers without enacting further protections. So to be clear, we have not enacted those further protections. The MPSC has signed off on that particular rate case. The can has been kicked down the road to the rate cases, which are ongoing now, where both DTE and consumers are each asking for over $400 million in rate hikes. And we have not made an actual decision about how we're going to implement the one line of protections in state law. We are operating without actual protections. We are fully in the Wild West right now. These data center projects are actively being built. They are already getting ex parte approval for specific rate agreements, and we have not even tried to implement these critical protections. And I want to, give an example of what that can look like outside of the economic realm, because I know the economics of this can be a bit abstract, but there's also very real environmental and health impacts. So in Saline, for example, they were allowed to bring in those diesel backup generators that folks talked about earlier. They were given an air quality permit for 14 diesel backup generators, which in theory would be used during emergencies. But in practice, as Gwen mentioned, the definition for that is very broad. And in a very recent context, I'd like to highlight that when we have very high demand on the grid, when we have a heat wave, as happens increasingly frequently every summer now, in theory, data centers often should be some of the first ones to have their power shut off. But in practice, that just means that they will turn on these diesel backup generators in order to keep running. Right now, there's nothing in state law that stops them from doing that. And when they do that, you're putting out diesel exhaust from these truck-sized generators into any given neighborhood, whether that's areas in Detroit that are already dealing with air quality issues, but increasingly it's also in rural areas that in the past had pristine air quality and now are dealing with 14 truck-sized diesel generators just spewing out exhaust. This is a very real health impact, and diesel exhaust causes a massive range of huge health problems, from things you would expect, asthma, respiratory issues, but also things like increased cancer risk, increased risk of heart problems. There's a whole range of very real life or death health issues that can come from the use of these diesel generators. And so with that, I'd like to end on this example, which Gwen also pointed out. This is an image of Elon Musk's data center just on the outskirts of Memphis, just right by the border in Mississippi. There was a very similar issue there, where they were given permission to have this battery of emergency diesel generators, and they were told, you can only turn these on when needed. They found out that they could just turn them on whenever they wanted more power from the grid, and they were caught using thermal imaging cameras just running these diesel generators pretty much constantly just to get extra power. And that's pumping out just extra air pollution illegally in contravention of even relatively weakened EPA guidelines into a neighborhood where working class people actually live. I mean, that's the real risk. That's what happens when we allow these data center projects to move forward and just hope that these protections might someday come into effect. So to make all this concrete in Michigan, what I want to stress is that we don't have these protections right now. And if we want to actually protect communities, whether urban or rural, we're going to need to figure out a way to put the brakes on and actually get these protections in place before we even consider allowing these projects to move forward. Thank you.
She's taking her ball and going home.
Yeah, I'm done here.
So to piggyback off what Chris said, the part about where when in a power outage, where who gets power, who doesn't get power, at one of our township meetings, I spoke directly to a DTE representative, and I really wish I had his name, but I don't. In any case, he said, I asked him, in a power outage, who does get restored quicker? And he said, number one was fire and police and, you know, these types of facilities, emergency services. Second was old folks' homes, those types of things. And then he stopped. And I said, well, who's number three? And he didn't say anything. And I said, is it data centers? And he basically refused to answer me. So I guess we can all fill in the blank on who number three is. But I guess if they do that, then at least they won't run their diesel generators, right? So, all right. So the last, we have one more presentation for you. And this is also a group project. I'm going to call them the toxicology twins. So, the first toxicology twin is Tammy K. Clark. She's a highly credentialed health and safety and compliance professional with over 20 years in the field of industrial hygiene and occupational and environmental health and safety. She is a court-approved subject matter expert on environmental health, occupational health and safety, and regulatory compliance. Kristen Meghan Kelly is an exposure scientist and industrial hygienist with 24 years of experience in occupational and environmental toxicology, specializing in human exposure pathways and real-world risk assessment. We give a big round of applause for the toxicology twins.
Are these on? No. That's the zero. Are they on now? Can you hear me? Okay. I see a green button. I think we're good. So can we turn this
What's
one
not on?
off?
Oh, wait.
Because we don't stand still. We like to move and we're kind of, yeah. Are you good?
I'm good. I got the timer going. We're good.
Okay, so normally Kristen and I will talk for 45 minutes to an hour, educating people all over the country on this issue for the past 8 months. So we're going to make this short and sweet and to the point, and then let y'all ask questions later. So I'm Tammy Clark, industrial hygienist. Are we cutting out? We're good? Okay. And I just want to quickly explain the field of industrial hygiene so that you all know why it is Kristen and I should be the ones talking to you about the health and environmental issues concerned with these types of facilities that really are their own new animal. It's a whole new thing we're dealing with that we've never dealt with before when we talk about occupational health, environmental health and safety. This is all very new, and that's why we decided we needed to blow the whistle again on all of this craziness. So the field of industrial hygiene is a very specific field. We work very much behind the scenes, and the joke is normally you have no idea who we are until something goes wrong. Because we're working behind the scenes to constantly monitor things, review processes, do things like air, soil, water testing, making sure exposures are within safe and healthy limits. Our field is designed to anticipate, recognize, evaluate, and control hazards, whether they be to you in your workplace. Every workplace has hazards. It doesn't matter what your job might be. The hazards might be different if you're working in a machine shop or on a construction project or in a hospital setting. But there's always hazards in our environment. And it's our job to anticipate those things, recognize what they are, and then put control measures in place, engineering controls, administrative controls, PPE, things like that to make sure that the hazards for you are reduced or eliminated completely if possible. So Our field is absolutely a public health field. We work in the community environment many times because occupational settings, occupational exposures can quickly turn into community exposures. They can turn into environmental contamination exposures. And so this is why our field is public health field, and it's very comprehensive. There are about 18 disciplines in our field. We have to know everything from ergonomics, radiation, noise, slips, trips, falls, the safety aspect of it, and the health aspect, the exposures to environmental hazards, toxicants. Kristen can explain that a little bit more. People have actually come at us. That's not a word. Actually, it is. But we have to be able to recognize all of that comprehensively. And then help you to be safe, whether it's on the job, in our communities, in our environment as well. This is why we do things like air, soil, water testing, because we want to make sure that our water, and we're going to talk a lot about water, our water is safe for you to drink. Our air is safe for you to breathe. And it is those of us in our career fields of industrial hygiene who do those testing processes, and then we make sure they're within what's called PELs, permissible exposure limits set by OSHA and NIOSH. So now you know who we are and what we do. And I'm going to let Kristen get into talking about some of the health issues that we are concerned about and that we know just because we're inside industrial facilities doing these kinds of tests and dealing with these kinds of exposures on a micro scale. So now we're talking about hyperscale, creating exposures to the community 24/7. So I'll let Kristen get into some of our concerns there.
Yeah, and as we dive into these issues, I want you to know that everything that we do and talk about has to do with exposure data. You may know the term randomized controlled trial, the gold standard of any scientific test. The data, when we're talking about exposures, again, is based on an 8-hour time-weighted average. But I want you to think about that, because when I talk about issues, it is highly intensified because now we're talking about 24/7 exposure. Okay, well, first off, a toxin comes from a bug or a snake or a plant. A toxicant comes from a building, like paints and solvents. Yeah, I had someone tell me toxicant was a word. I was like, oh. So Google can be your friend. All right, so let's talk about, in our field, we have to assess things like medical professionals triage issues. For me, the most hazardous issue with hyperscale data centers is the tonal noise. A lot of people don't know what tonal noise is, or they didn't know what it was or heard the term until you heard the hyperscale data center argument. Well, I spent 9 years on active duty working in bioenvironmental engineering in the Air Force, and I can tell you that tonal noise has been used as a military torture technique. So when you think about a hyperscale data center, it's a grand scale. First of all, when you hear me say data center, just know I'm always talking about hyperscale data center, okay? Because data centers have been around for years. Your banks have them, your hospitals have them. But the amount of electrical equipment, fan components, cooling towers, just like light has a spectrum, noise has a spectrum. And on the low frequency end, you have infrasound tonal noise, and it's a constant 24/7 hum. It has biological impacts. It's the noise that you feel, and it's measured in something called decibels, C and Z. Now, when you're blasting Metallica at 2 a.m., you have noise ordinances, right? That's measured in dBA, audible noise. So the developers are the narcissists who love bomb communities and say, it's only 55 dB. dB what? Because they purposely think that you don't know about this, but you're all honorary IHs today. So what does it do? That constant hum is putting your brain into constant flight or fight mode. And it's attacking children more, neurodivergent children, expectant mothers, and the elderly and chronically ill. Having your body in that constant stress mode can elevate the stress hormone cortisol. It can cause cardiovascular issues and neurological issues. For children, it can delay concentration, reading comprehension, and it will make your child very irritable. If you have a child who isn't autistic or doesn't have ADHD, they will exhibit some of those symptoms if they're constantly in this fight or flight mode. Also, with expectant mothers, the elevation of the cortisol can cause stress maternal fetal heart rates for the mother and the baby. And what happens is that can cause an early term labor or low birth weight. In fact, when I was in the military, when we had tonal noise from certain operations, if you were an expectant mother, we had to reassign them to a different duty around the base, to an administrative job. This tonal noise also it acts so differently than audible noise because at night it's actually more prevalent because you're not mowing your lawn or trucks aren't going by because of the dBA, so that dBc and Z is more elevated. Wind can carry it even further. So sometimes if the conditions are right, there's a nighttime inversion and you can be right next to a hyperscale data center and 5 miles down the road, they're actually getting a worse exposure to the tonal noise. So when people ask me, what's a safe setback? I say, I can't tell you that because it also depends on what's nearby because tonal noise, I can cover my phone if I was playing music. Tonal noise will go right through the floor, up the walls. I joke that it's like Sonic the Hedgehog. You know, it goes in hyper mode and it just keeps going and pings. That's what tonal noise does. So it can bounce off of a tower, bounce off a substation and just keep going. It can harm animals. All the same health impacts that I told you, it can harm animals, equestrian farms, livestock, ranchers, dairy cows. It lowers milk production. It lowers the ability for them to feed. They can act erratic, bang their heads on walls. So tonal noise is not negligible. It's a very real hazard. It's also the easiest to control. That's what's upsetting. It's the easiest control, but these billion-dollar corporations are saying, oh, we can't follow the hierarchy of safety and controls because it's too expensive. Spare me. They can put those towers, the servers, on foam. They can put them on springs. They have engineering controls afforded to them that they know about to make it less hazardous. And just fun fact before I pass it to Tammy about the water, the whopping 7 to 10 employees that we're seeing at these hyperscale data centers, their offices have special engineering controls in them. They have open chord walls, so there's a gap in the wall so that the tonal noise isn't hitting them. Why? Because they're protected by OSHA standards. But who's there to protect you? We are.
Yeah, and I want to build on that just really quickly. I'm going to add to what Kristen said because we've spent a lot of time out in the heartland states over the last couple of months, Kansas, and where did we just come back from? I don't even remember. North Dakota.
Yeah.
I don't even remember what day it is anymore because we're always somewhere fighting for all of you and trying to stop this insanity. But what I want to add to that is what we saw in the heartland and what some of my colleagues here have referenced already in some of their presentations are the transmission lines. So we're seeing these transmission lines that are massive, bigger than anything we have here in Michigan. We were shocked by the size of them. And then these massive substations that they're building that are bigger than anything I've seen here, except for maybe right downtown Detroit. But they're also saying, oh, we're going to double those substations in size. And then they're planning to put the data centers all along those new transmission lines that are coming from the West Coast to the east. They're going into Missouri right now, and they're going to double the size of the substations and pocket these little towns in with these hyperscale data centers all along them. And what we immediately tuned into and are so concerned about is what's called cumulative exposure. The tonal noise, the EMF, and the LF, the lower frequency, the infrasound, all of this as a cumulative exposure from all of these things combined is going to destroy the farming and the ranching communities because the cattle, the horses, the milk production, the mating cycles, it's all going to be completely destroyed. The towns, we told these little towns in Kansas, you guys are not going to be able to live here. If what they actually have planned to do, they do, you are going to be exposed to so much cumulative exposure of this. You won't be able to sleep. You won't feel good. You will be sick. It will affect, like Kristen said, many adverse biological reactions. Your heart rate, your cortisol levels, your sleeping, you won't be able to stay here. And this is very serious and it is very real. And they are getting away with it because they are not doing the required, legally required environmental impact studies, aquifer studies, water studies. We'll get into the water in a minute. But this is very real. And why do you think we have these regulatory requirements in the first place for any industrial or commercial facility or building? But nobody's doing it with these data centers. They're getting away with it. Everybody's turning a blind eye in the regulatory world, and we are regulatory specialists. We work in the worlds of OSHA, EPA, DOT, even FAA many times because our projects deal with airports and all of that. So this is very serious. We are not alarmists, and we don't conflate things. The things that we're blowing the whistle on are because they're coming at us in a manner that is so exasperated with this cumulative exposure on a scale we've never seen that we are going to see very, very serious, and we already are, human health issues animal health issues, and then environmental issues. So I'm not trying to scare you all, but this is real, and you need to be informed and educated, right, on this. And board members, Kristen and I love to talk to board members. We've talked to many state legislators, and we've testified in many legislative bodies and in committees around the country, county commission board members, and local planning and zoning committee members. We're going to give you some solutions and some requirements that you need to know and you need to put into place to protect your communities from the financial issues that have been addressed and to protect the citizens and the animals and the environment in your communities as well. So I'm just really quickly going to touch on the water. It's so exhaustive, I could get into so much more, but I'm just going to basically let you all know that these hyperscale data centers, number one, are completely outdated. We don't ever need a hyperscale data center. The technology that exists today already makes them obsolete. So what are we doing? We have technology that is so much faster and more efficient and smaller, and there's already a race to get these smaller systems out in space. They're putting them underground, geothermal cooled, in the seabed. Let me just say this. The state of Virginia has more hyperscale data centers or more data centers than the whole country of China. And yet somehow China's beating us, or we're worried about them beating us. They already control every single movement and aspect of their citizens. Every aspect, with 400 data centers. And they want to put in thousands of hyperscale here in America. I'm telling you, we do not need that for the computational outputs. It's not being driven by an organic demand. As some of my colleagues have already referred, it is being driven by a propped up Wall Street bubble and this race that's on for this. So this is about a lot more. And Kristen will talk about the contracts in just a minute. But don't let anybody tell you that they need, X amount of water. Oh, don't worry because we use closed loop. There is no such thing truly as a closed loop system, especially if water is ever involved. And I've heard some of these like Google executives say, oh, but we use a glycol cooled solution. Yeah, that's 50% water. Just because it's glycol cooled doesn't mean there's no water. And they might not use 5 million gallons of water a day, but they're still going to be using a lot more than our aquifers can possibly sustain. So we need to require them if they are going to come in, and we are going to allow data centers to continue to be built. We need to require them to use alternative cooling solutions because several do exist. They do not need to access our municipal water, our rivers, lakes, aquifers, basins, river basins, all of that. They don't need to access any of it because the alternative solutions, the synthetic solutions and coolants, mineral oil, submersive or immersion cooling processes, geothermal cooling, they don't need water. I just want to be very clear, and it's very important that our boards understand that. All right, so don't let them lie to you because they do. They flat out lie. They mislead you and they gaslight you when you bring things like this up. So the water, our municipal water systems cannot possibly handle the anti-scaling agents, the anti-corrosives, the biocides that the water does pick up as it goes through the system. And so every now and then the operators have to purge that. It's called blowdown, and then they have to replenish it. So this is why it's important for you to understand your municipal water system, your water treatment facilities are not equipped to be able to filter out the types of things that the water picks up as part of these types of processes. And this is the kind of stuff that we look at, we test, we sample in different types of industries and facilities. So, and that's why this is such a concern, because where does that blowdown go, that water go? Well, through your drain systems. This is why your drain commissioner can kill it. The drain commissioner cannot approve, can say, nope, we don't approve of it, because our systems are not able to handle this. So it either makes its way into its municipal water system through your drain systems, or like what Ohio EPA has allowed them just to blow down right into the rivers. Well, where are a lot of us getting our water? In North Dakota, where we were, they get their water, the majority of the state, from 3 major rivers. So we're just going to blow down that contamination into the river? There's no cleaning it. And yet they will tell you, we follow all required OSHA standards. Well, guess what? There's no standards for any of this stuff. And I'm going to toss it back to Kristen. by letting her pick up with her famous line about standards, because this is why they're getting away with stuff. They know darn well there's not any particular standard for what they're doing. So they're able to gaslight all of us.
Yeah, we only have about 4 minutes left. So like I said, we talk hours on this issue, but yeah, Tammy's bringing up the point, and it was brought up earlier, is that everyone says we have these safeguards. Well, an absence of a standard is not an absence of a hazard. And like forever chemicals, it's in the soil and the water. People don't realize there's no regulations for those. And they come from the hyperscale data centers. But I know that the diesel generator issues was brought up. I'm just going to dive into it a little bit deeper for a moment. And it's that they also have lithium ion batteries that click on first. And then they have the generators warm up. And they're in the environmental world, there's tier reporting. Basically, you can't have everyone and their mother release PM 2.5. That's particulate matter. You heard that during the wildfire smoke. That's why I'm telling people a mask isn't going to save you, because it's so small, is that the particulates are so tiny, they get into the deep lung. Then you have volatile organic compounds, dioxins and furans. There's a myriad of toxicants that come from diesel generators, and we're talking about your neighbor's backup. We're talking about giant Connex boxes, and the average data center has 200 to 400. So that's why you have to understand, this is why I support pauses and one-year moratoriums, because we have to all stop. And the great thing about this is it's not political. I don't care what side of the aisle anyone's on. We have shared resources, we have a shared fight, and we must band together to stop. We outnumber the sociopaths, and that's all I'm going to say, because we are very short on time. But I want to leave it to Tammy to close it out. But just remember, work in your community, put all your differences aside, and remember, once they're in, it's very hard. You can't fight it. But don't be risk averse, okay? These attorneys can be so risk averse at the township level. Yes, you can. It's not exclusionary, if you want to explain that.
Yeah, so to just give you some solutions, as we've been advising state legislators, county boards, and local boards, one of the things that's driven us crazy is how risk-averse attorneys are and many board members. And that has opened the door to a lot of this, because those attorneys smell blood in the water, and they will go after you if they think you're afraid and they can make you coward. Well, if you do not have, one of the main things that you need to do is ensure that your master zoning plan for your district, your region, your county, your township, whatever it is, lines up with the actual zoning you have. And if you don't, you can get into trouble there, because if your master plan says you're going to allow heavy industrial, commercial, residential, and then you don't actually have any designated, they can actually force you when, oh, this farmer said he'll sell his land. Well, you don't have any heavy industrial listed, or you don't have any designated heavy industrial, but your master plan says you do. So then they can force you. Other than that, they cannot come into your community and force you to change your zoning. That is up to the local boards. That's why I have said from day one, the more localized the issue is, the more power we, the people, actually do have. And we have chased them away. We, successfully, when I say we, I don't mean just Kristen and I mean collectively, we, the people, have successfully stopped over 50% of all new data center construction that was slated for 2026. So we are winning this war. And the more you guys come to these meetings and get educated and take it to your boards and, get good people on your boards, recall those boards if they're not listening to you. If they're not going to listen to we the people, then they shouldn't be sitting in your seat. I think they forget that their title is representative, right? So this is a really important thing for all of us collectively to be doing. But some of the other requirements that you should put in place that are like real estate requirements are, number one, the siting. These facilities, first of all, no hyperscale. Anything above 10,000 feet is considered hyperscale. We do not need a hyperscale data center. They do not need to be near communities, schools, farms, ranches, etc. And with the new technology that we have, we don't need them anyway. So you should make that a number one rule. No hyperscale data centers allowed, because they don't fit in this particular community due to the severe, extreme human and health environmental hazards they create, where the smaller standalone facilities don't. So the siting is very important. Brownfields, contaminated areas like Superfund sites, repurposing of abandoned industrial areas, Great. Let's look at that. Number 2, besides that, is update your noise ordinances like Kristen referred to. They should not just be monitoring for audible noise in the dBA range. They should also be monitoring for dBc and dBz tonal noise 24/7, because that's the real hazard there, and they don't do that, and they won't. So your community needs to update its noise ordinance. Number 3, you need to ensure that they give you a decommissioning plan, because if these and when these campuses are abandoned, and we've already heard Google executives say that they will be, because of the new technology coming at them so fast, it will actually be cheaper for them to abandon an existing campus and maintain that facility than to embrace the newer technology. So you need to have, your community needs to have the millions of dollars upfront in an escrow that it's going to take to deconstruct, decommission, and then completely remediate that soil that's going to be contaminated with forever chemicals and other things. Your little community is not going to have the money to do that. So they need to be responsible for giving you that money up front. Don't just trust them when they say, oh, we have a decommissioning plan. Yeah, well, we need a decommissioning escrow account, right, to protect us as a community. So these are some things. Did I miss any?
No, but I did real quick.
Yeah.
About the tonal noise. If you know a farmer, I want you to know, have you seen the videos back in the day where people played like Mozart and classical music for their house plants? There's actually something called bioacoustics and acoustic ecology, where tonal noise can actually harm the outcome of crops. So if you have a family member, or hey, you eat food, you should care about that. And it's something that people don't talk about because, again, we have new hazards. I remember a time where they sprayed DDT on children. So
Right. Yep. So I think that's it. These are just some helpful tips of things. We're not winning every battle, but I do believe we're winning this overall war because we truly are still governing here in the United States. We haven't completely lost it yet. So we need to continue to do so while we can. All right. So if you have any other questions, I think they're going to open it up to a panel Q&A, and we can do a little bit of that then. So thank you, everyone.
Hey, that is correct. We're going to have a Q&A right now. If you have a question, just come up to the podium here and ask any of the panelists. It's going to be a 3-minute max, and please keep it to what the discussion matter was. We're not trying to do political speeches or grandstand or anything like that. It's just a strictly Q&A on the facts of these, what the discussion was today.
Hello? Can you hear me? Oh, okay. First of all, I want you all to know Prescott, Kristen, and Tammy. I've been following you. I live in Gibraltar, which is on Lake Erie. There is a moratorium in my city right now. My city is only 5,000 people. You just mentioned Brownfield. Okay, so we had a steel mill in our town and it closed down. We have a data center that wants to come in there and use that building to do their data center. They say they only want 100 megawatt. They're going to start at 100 megawatt, maybe up to 300. So anyway, I've been following all of you, and when I found out about this in March, I've been sitting and hitting my city council every 2 weeks, because we have city council meetings every 2 weeks. I am the only person that gets up and talks about data centers. I have slammed them with so much information. Your presentation, Prescott, because of the small town, I sent it to all my council. I got peeps. Nothing. I've mentioned different things about the blowdowns and stuff like that. Oh, you wouldn't believe the response I got on that one. That was a good one. I should probably share it with you one time. But I went through and said land usage. I asked them about power grids. I asked them about water usage, environmental impact. By the way, the city of Gibraltar, We are across the street where they want to build us. It is across the street from the International Wildlife Refuge. So, we have been complaining and saying, what are you going to do with our migrating birds and everything? I'm telling you, I get peeps. I am so frustrated, and you talk about all the stuff with your noise and stuff. I've gone to my zone. I go to zoning board meetings. I go to infrastructure meetings. I go to everything my city does, and I just make my face known, and people just look at me and go, what does she want now? But nobody will answer me because they're in a moratorium. They are supposedly working to get our zoning regarding data centers. I specifically asked them about the CZ for what you feel, not what you hear. And nobody, I don't know what else I can do. But I just want you to know that I follow you guys all. I saw you guys when you were out in the farm country. And when I find stuff that relates to my city, I immediately fire emails to everybody on council. So please understand, I'm trying to do what I can, but this is tough. This one's tough.
I'm flattered that you follow what I've been writing, so thank you. And I'm sorry they're not being very friendly and open. There is one other thing you can do, though, which I did. You can run for office.
Yeah. Well,
I ran for office because it's not just the data center, but other financial problems. And 11 months after starting the data center thing, I've now become the village president.
oh, okay.
And they have to answer when I call now.
Yeah.
Put aside your fear of that and do it.
Yeah, I might have to.
Yeah, and I want to add to that because you need to get a group. You need to organize. One person cannot take on one. It's very difficult to be the little David up against the giant. We
Right.
know God connected us. We met each other during COVID because we were both saying the same things about the inappropriate response, very dangerous, unhealthy protocols that our government was pushing, and we were both losing our minds. Well, we found each other when we connected. Now people call us the dynamic duo or whatever, toxicology, queens, whatever. But there is strength in numbers.
Yeah.
You really need to, everything that we've seen be successful. And Prescott can tell you that too. Organizing and strategizing is very important. Your neighbors, your people you meet in the grocery store, your Bible study group, or whatever it is, you got to get people together and you've got to start organizing and running things. Even this town, talk to Wendy here.
Wendy's one of my friends.
Oh, there you go.
That's why I'm here tonight.
There
too.
you go.
So,
Then she can give you some tips because,
Yeah.
all it takes is a few to
Right.
really win big battles, but it's very difficult to do alone.
Oh, no, I agree with you, but like I said, nobody's talking. They're in their moratorium, and everything has to go through one person, which really bothers me because that person was not elected. She's an administrator. She has told every single council person, you are not allowed to talk to anybody about data centers. I'm like, really? I didn't elect you, honey. I elected him, and I want an answer from him, or her, whatever. But we're not, nobody's saying anything, but we got to get moving pretty soon.
One other potential point of intervention that I want to point out that might get folks moving, doesn't always help. But a lot of the townships across Michigan have been filing Freedom of Information Act requests. And you can ask your local township government, you can ask the state for certain things, and you can ask the federal government to provide records back to you. Now, I will say in Michigan, we have a little bit unfavorable Freedom of Information Act rules. What I mean by this is oftentimes they can really charge you an arm and a leg out here. But it never hurts to ask because you don't have to follow through. So you can say, I want to see your internal communications about this ordinance that you're drafting. I want to see all of your emails about it. And if they come back and they say that's going to be, an arm and a leg, you can say, actually, no, I don't want to. Or you can then get together with a group of your, friends and colleagues, and start fundraising so that you can get those records released, put that pressure on.
Yeah, thank you.
Hello, I have a couple questions. First one, do you guys going to provide copies of all your fabulous slideshows and whatnot, maybe on that Facebook page and where this is live streamed? I took a lot of notes, but perfect. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because there was a lot of information and I know I missed some of it and it's very helpful. I also had a couple little minor questions. Somebody had mentioned about the rankings on electricity getting turned off. I believe there's also rankings with water. So in a drought, normally it's like hospitals, fire departments, and then residents, and then industry and whatever. And I thought data centers are kind of cut in line on top of residents in a lot of municipalities. Is that true? Okay, that's a big concern too.
I'll chime. I did my job for a large electrical utility company, not in the state, and I can tell you that data centers are actually ranked one of the top because of their coded designation. Some of them are used for military, and they're considered an essential service.
Yeah.
So it's actually higher ranking than you think. And also, when you brought up the whole power cutting off, there's safety risks there. I had to shadow people that work there, and they got shot at. So, like you said, it ruins communities. There's a lot more. I mean, that's your livelihood. I'm not promoting violence, but people will do things. So, yeah, they're ranked a lot higher than people realize. You have the people on dialysis and things like that. They're at the same level as hospitals.
That's crazy. That is insane. And then also I had a client in Ohio, so I don't know if this pertains to Michigan, but I've noticed their utility bills have easily doubled in the last couple of years. And a lot of it isn't the rates. So my question is, I'm seeing a lot of distribution charge, some generic lump sums, capacity charges. Is that part of how they're kind of hiding in things that are not part of the rates? Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I can. Yeah. So especially in Michigan, a lot of the costs that are getting covered with these huge rate hikes, the justification often is that there's been so much damage or overtime degradation to the grid, and especially the residential distribution system. And often, if they can argue that these costs are just going to the residential distribution system, that can be the justification for applying those rates just to residential ratepayers. There's when you really dig into it, there's a lot of unfairness with what section of the pie gets paid by residential, industrial, large load, et cetera. And that absolutely is one of the ways. But on top of that, I'd also flag that both on the question of the rates that they're paying and the question of where in the pecking order are they for getting shut off. A lot of what we have in Michigan ends up being on this very tenuous case by case basis. So in the Saline example, there are relatively weak actual protections, and there were some slight additional things they agreed to as part of the consent agreement through the whole legal process, where their way of bulldozing over local opposition was to sue the city and then go into this consent agreement where they agreed to a list of things that, as far as I can tell, the data center company more or less came up with in exchange for being given that permission anyways. And there, one of the things they agreed to sort of voluntarily was being one of the first to be shut off in theory. And one of the other things they agreed to had more to do with the rates that they were paying. And I mean, it's not nothing. And there are some meaningful concessions in there, especially around things like the decommissioning fund that we talked about earlier. But none of those are protections that are actually in state law. So that we can't count on getting that kind of protection for every single data center project because, they're not all going to just agree to that.
Yeah, that was the situation with the zoning on the ordinance, but not on the map. They kind of got bullied into that, right? Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much.
Hi there, my name is Courtney. I'm from Ypsi Township. I don't really have a question per se, mostly just comments that are In agreement. First, I want to start with, like I said, I'm in Ypsi. I'm only a few miles from here. I'm 2 miles from the Los Alamos U of M site. I think there's, like you said, there's about 7 proposed within a few miles of my house. Also in Van Buren, there is a battery storage site coming. And I wanted to take a moment to thank Planning Commissioner Jackson Paul is actually here. He was a big part of the Planning Commission saying no to that project, and we are working on getting the board to agree with that. A lot of what you said about the tonal noise was a big issue that we brought up. It is right next to DeBuck's Farm, right down the road. They're one of our biggest agritourism sites in Wayne County, and it will definitely negatively impact them. As well as the Google site on the other side of the township. Like I said, I'm in Ypsi Township, so I am on the corner there dealing with what Augusta is doing, what Ypsi is doing, and what Van Buren is doing. I would also like to bring up the water thing really quick. I was one of 2 public commenters at the at the board meeting at Ypsi Township the other night on the 21st. I really recommend anybody, if you have time, to take a while to listen to that board meeting. YCUA was the Yucca was there for a rate increase approval. Obviously, Yucca supplies water to us in Ypsi, in Augusta, Pittsfield, surrounding areas. About a 9% increase. If you listen to Director Luke Blackburn talk about those increases, a lot of them are coming from Great Lakes Water Authority, who is fast tracking a lot of these data center projects, and he's explicitly said that it is because of the data center projects and that they are having a hard time allocating where those costs are coming from and evaluating that. I think that conversation is something that you guys should really listen to. It really highlights a lot of those issues that were brought up, as well as issues that I brought up in my public comment that I was personally emailed about today from Carlisle Wortman Associates about allegations that I made, basically explaining all of what you said about the master plan and the language that is in the master plan that says exactly what their plan is to bring these data centers in, and that it is a pattern across the state. Carlisle Wortman Associates is in Dundee, Saline, all of these places, and they're calling this an allegation when it's a pattern. People are observing it. It's not just me. I'm not the only one saying it. So, Ben, it's out there. It is not a rumor. There's solid evidence. You can go over that master plan that you asked for those documents for. It's right there in the language. So everything that you guys said, it's all over these associations and these master plans, and it is definitely something that us coming together and calling out is important, because as that email showed me, they're scared. They know that we know that this is an issue in our community and it's not welcome here. So thank you.
Well, I'm really proud of you. I'm really proud of you because it was something that really stood out when you said I was one of 2 public comments. Where's the rest of your town? This is a problem.
They did do an They did do an informational meeting the week before that I was not able to attend, where a lot of the township and city was there. There were many public comments against the data center project. I went there specifically to thank our supervisor for showing up at Saline. She showed up and against the tax abatement meeting and was giving them a lot of advice. So they are saying no in Ypsi. Our board has been one of the only boards, I feel like, that has stood up against the project. But with it being U of M in Los Alamos, like you said, national security, they're going to come in and do whatever they want. U of M doesn't have to pay property taxes, so we're not getting any revenue either. So the township's showing up. I just showed up to a meeting that happened to involve the water because I thought that was important as well. And then I pointed out the master plan issues. So just to clarify, Ypsi is saying no data centers. So thank you.
Proud of you guys.
Yeah, I feel like Michigan. I'm Sarah Brabs, and I'm friends with Courtney, who's such a badass. Otherwise known as someone who tells the truth to power. But anyway, I'm sorry, I can't do this, whatever's going on here. Okay, so I just wanted to say, especially to you, Carlisle Wortman, because I read that email that was sent to the Ypsi Township Board. It was so flowery and nice, your offer to meet with Courtney and the Ypsi Township Board. But anyway, the reason that that got surfaced is interesting because Erin Brockovich was just in The Guardian for a lengthy article, and she surfaced some of the patterns that she has been hearing about around the United States. And one of those patterns, Carlisle Wortman, is exactly what you did to Saline Township, whether it was you or the township attorney, whoever wants to kick the ball of responsibility. There is the latest status on a certain type of ordinance, which is otherwise known as a law, something I didn't understand before this fight. The latest status of an ordinance related to rezoning was an unfinished draft. That's where the township stood. And you came in and you're the planning consultant and you have a township attorney and you have a board of frankly fairly nice people trying to do their best by a township. And it's years later and suddenly there's this ordinance. I don't know where it came from. I mean, who is the ordinance expert? Is that something to do with planning consultants? I don't know. I mean, rumor has it that Carlisle Wortman was part of that whole experience. And that is in court records, affidavits related to Saline Township. So it is not untrue. It might be disputed and none of us really know why it was not a problem in court, that seemed to matter for township residents and laws. But anyways, that's not what I came up here to talk about. I got distracted because I'm so impressed by Courtney. But anyway, we have a really good ally in Michigan, Michael Bomarito. He's has many expert hats, but he wrote a handbook called How to Fight a Data Center, and he also has a 400-ish page book called This is Server Country, and it's about the hyperscale industry data center build out in the United States. It tells the story of Saline Township, and I mention him because for Michigan, he built nuisancemap.org, which is like if we could collaborate with Erin Brockovich, it would be the thing that came right after her data gathering, for instance. It points to state law and what matters about how to track nuisances, such as property values, such as water, such as all the other things that are called nuisances in court. Anyways, and each state is a little different, but we're partnering with other organizations. I'm nodding at Gwen because Frac Tracker is one of them that we've been talking to expand it around the United States. And it's very important. But the other thing that's important is Michigan does have a law that makes our FOIAs, by law, they are not supposed to cost a lot. Do we know that? Not really. Most of us did not ask for this job. So Michael Bomarito also did a FOIA for Saline Township. And if you Google his FOIA, it's Michael Bomarito, Saline Township FOIA. And I would throw in ALEA Institute, ALEA Institute, because he did it through his ethical AI nonprofit. You can see some of the wording that he uses related to the cost, labor, and assessment points straight to Michigan law. So it's a really good thing for people to know about. And I also, I don't like to come up and announce shit from my mouth when I have experts in front of me, but I just have to say, I've been so looking forward to meeting and hearing from you too. I have a very quick question for you, Michelle. Chris Gilmer-Hill, I'm a huge fan. I'm not sure if we've met in person, and these two I'm already a serious fan of. And I am so glad, Wendy, I have no idea how you did this when you're also running a recall or a recall petition and hopefully a recall and all the things that matter. I am so appreciative of you. I'm always in awe of Wendy. She has just been, from the beginning, one of the leading fighters in this fight, especially locally. So, Michelle, you mentioned the federal, with the transmission lines, it's regulated federally in these big chunks, right? This is something I'm just beginning to learn about. Am I correct when I say it's kind of like a market, sort of like Wall Street? As in, like MISO is our grid, right? The several states, and then it's just however much it costs, it's decided at a federal level through that market, essentially. And then the other part to that is, I was told, Clara, my friend that's doing the live stream right now with me, we went on a data center road trip, and someone just much smarter than me said to me, when more energy is required from the grid, it's more expensive, period. So that's why everyone around the nation's rates are going up unless there's actual protections that are more than words on a page, right? So can you confirm if that's true and also say a little bit about this energy grid thing?
Yeah, I think there's a really interesting report called Overcharge that was just released about the history of the grid, how it was made, and why it is done on a market-based method. And it's authored by Isaac Severe and Roshan Krishnan. Really interesting. You know, the thing in Michigan that is true is that we're a regulated energy market. And so what will have to happen, as many of our speakers explained here, is it's going to have to go through regulatory proceedings to set the rate, to see what is fair for an affordable and reliable system. So that's what the MPSC does. And it was done in the 1930s to regulate monopolies, right? So monopolies for utilities were maintained in the 1930s because the automotive industry needed it, right? They needed the reliability. In other regions, there's an unregulated or deregulated energy market, in which case the market moves based on energy reliability, supply and demand. If there's a wildfire or a climate incident, those energy rates can balloon or go down. And in other regions like PJM, where we saw a mass crisis of ballooning energy rates, in real time, where the grid had to set those rates based on availability.
Another, not ours, but
massive grid, right?
Okay.
So we're on
So
MISO.
like this is why when there's issues with climate or war or whatever, it gets more expensive too.
You know, I think what we really need to keep our focus on, right, is that really at every point in energy production, there is between a 9% and a 13% profit rate that's extracted. Right. So just between 2021 and 2024, over $100 billion was extracted from U.S. energy consumers towards financialization and profit. And so there is as Chris said, there's an incentive to push energy costs up because the profit motive is so good while data centers are forcing it. I think the other thing that I'd like to say in regard to the economic situation is that every single town or township elected leader that I've heard, water commissioners, all are saying, we just don't have money to run our schools, to pay our pensions, to make sure that our roads and our bridges are not crumbling, to provide clean water. I heard the city of Detroit officials say, we need data centers. They are a welcome addition because we need the money. So for me, when I see the profit motive of $137 billion in 3 years going into stock options on some place far away, and knowing that, we don't have after school programs in Detroit public schools or enough IEP officials for kids with special needs because the money's not coming to our townships and cities. That's the problem we need to figure out, right? Pay your taxes and follow the law, right? We all have to do it. Why don't data centers have to do it?
I just wanted to add, because you brought up MISO.
Yeah.
I learned this when I worked for the electrical company, and we have FERC, but you have NERC. And this is not being political, but facts are facts. This current administration absorbed FERC, and that was totally, I don't even know how that happened, because it's supposed to be third party to where they look at, can we handle this? Is it safe? And when it comes to the MISO agreement, it is very possible. So when you look at all the states in Canada that we're connected to, when you, not you, but who, a sociopath. When
I got
they
you.
consent to a data center and they have to hike the rates because it's for increasing, like fixing and building more things, we have to pay for that. We can consent to it here, but the people down the line who are now having failed service didn't, and they can cut off the agreement. So that's what a lot of the average person, and I can tell you a lot of FERC, it's classified. I could tell you a side story after this about what happened to me when I jumped on a FERC phone call from my non-work phone and got raided. But anyway.
What does FERC stand for?
It's Federal Electrical Energy Regulatory Commission. But my point is, Canada could say, we're done. So we have to, there's so many things, and I'm glad you brought up MISO because there's a lot of acronyms in this whole fight, but it's not just us deciding. We are straining the grid. We already can't handle it. So I'm glad that you brought that up.
Yeah, Oracle was just compared to Lehman Brothers, which we all know that they're credited with causing our 2008 crash. I wonder why. Hey, I bubble. Okay, Tim is telling me to wrap up. Well, no, I waved the microphone. Who wants to say, hi, Reggie? Reggie Miller. I'm a fangirl.
Hi, everyone. It's good to see you. Full disclosure, I'm State Representative Reggie Miller, and I just have Thank you. I think I've written more data center bills than any other legislator in the state of Michigan. No, a lot of things that you talked about, I wrote bills about, and I hope them to be one day a model bill for states across the country, to be honest with you. So my first question is, when you look at land use and energy impacts, what's the blind spots that local government isn't seeing? Who'd like to answer that for me?
Land use and energy.
Yeah, the
blind
energy
spots?
impacts, yes.
Okay, so some of this goes back to original siting. Remember when we were talking about the requirements that people need to be looking at? Siting is very, very important, and they're getting that wrong all across the board, which leads to multiple problems, domino effect problems. So if you're talking about land use like special conditional permitting or that type of thing, where you're talking, what are you talking about here as far as the blind spots of land use? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, yeah, that they're not seeing right now.
Well,
we need to bring to their attention.
Number one, the use of prime agriculture land in communities is absolutely irresponsibly dangerous to plop something like a heavy scale industrial facility that is going to create air emissions, tonal noise, the light pollution,
heat islands,
slope, heat islands, all of that. And so you're going to be harming people and animals all around you. So I don't care if they apply. Somebody from Texas, a rancher from Texas just reached out to me on the way here. I was telling Kristen, he's asking about, they have a huge ranch. Very, very, I mean, that's what Texas is, right? And he said, and we are finding our ranches are being so harmed, but yet we have another data center applying for special conditional use. I'm sorry, that is not an acceptable place ever. So exciting comes down to this, but the problem that we're having, and I appreciate your bills, and every time I see them, I'm on your page like, yes, thank you, go for it. Love you, thank you. But what the problem is they're not understanding or even believing the hazards.
Exactly.
That's the big problem. Yeah. And it's because the regulatory agencies, and in Michigan OSHA here has gotten terrible. I've been complaining about this to my legislative friends, like, y'all need to do something about these regulatory agencies and rein them in, because they have gotten to be out of control, and they're actually not doing the things they were designed to do, which is to protect people and the environment. And then they're out there actually causing harms by doing other things, looking the other way when we should be pulling environmental permits. Oh, let's just look the other way and let them do it. Right. So you're going to allow the harms. So number one, it's the lack of education, because we're allowing we're handing the wolf the keys to the hen house, and then we're allowing them to write their own rules. So we're only listening to Google, Meta, Oracle, and then when people like Kristen and I come in and testify, we're gaslit.
Yes, absolutely.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes,
so
I do. I have.
And I know you are open-minded, because you are one of them who is very open-minded. And we've worked with others who are, but on the whole, they're letting money trump. They're being open-minded to learn about the real facts and the hazards. So then when they come in with land use, it's not really a blind spot. It's intentionally turning a blind eye for money.
Yes. One more question, if I may. So how do we get over these townships, cities, and villages saying, we're too far down the rabbit hole, we're too far into this, and you face those risk-adverse attorneys who are saying, well, we're going to sue you, or they allude to that in the whispers, in the intimidation. How do I get boards to wake up that that's not always the case, and they shouldn't fear lawsuits?
I just wanted to quickly add, even though you said land, it ties into the promised taxes. So we were on a panel in Virginia. There was an economist there, and we found out about how a lot of the proclaimed tax revenue that comes in actually goes right back to the data center because of agreements of keeping their infrastructure up and the roads and all that into there. And they use the payments in lieu of the taxes, and it's just a set payment, even when they're thriving. So the return of the money that usually gets these people on board and they fight you, there is none.
Yeah.
And you're lowering the property taxes. I'm against taxation. Taxation
But
and
they
stuff was
claim
in my wedding vows.
You're going to be the number one tax, payer.
It's not there, and they're lowering the property values. If you get a data center next to you, good luck selling your house. Your equity's gone. And don't shoot the messenger. That's why we're fighting this for everyone. So it's the money, the promise of money. That's why I say they love bomb. It's not a reality.
I agree. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I want to answer that question about how do you get them to listen to you?
Yeah.
You get real loud, like we're doing. You show up, you speak up, you keep using, and you use your position and say, listen, I know you are. You're one I've been following. I know that. And I appreciate that so much. But you need to just, like what Kristen and I are doing everywhere we go, and we just keep doing it. And we are also trying to educate and activate other people. We can't do it alone. So the goal is to educate people, inform people, and then empower them to go and be the solution to their own problems too by getting involved and by telling them directly, stop being so risk averse. What are you so worried about? I mean, this is ridiculous. You've got the reason you're on this board is to represent your community, and you're not doing it. They're showing up en masse and you're not listening to them. We
need people to wake up. We need our
Yes,
residents to
yes.
wake up and pay attention
Right.
and get to these city council meetings, township board meetings.
That's right. Get
Yes.
people activated to be loud and to make their 3-minute public comments, go to the meetings. And then we talk to the board members and I tell them directly, you need to remember whose seat you're sitting in. And if you don't listen to your constituents, they're going to run a referendum and a recall, and I'll help them do it.
Right.
And we'll replace you with good citizens who care more about their communities than their backroom deals and their money. Because that's a lot what's happening too.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
Chris, I'm a big fan of yours. And if you are so blessed to be able to represent people in Michigan, what would be the 3 top bills that you would take on in the legislature?
That's a fun question.
And you could look at all of mine.
So, I'll say, specifically on data centers, because I have obviously thought a lot about it, and there's so many. So number one, I think the bill that you have, I think an NDA ban is beyond common sense. And I would love to see an NDA ban just across the board, but especially anything to do with data centers at the local and state level. That feels like even before the moratorium question, just absolute immediate urgency.
And one that's not watered down.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. One that isn't just, only if you get certain tax exempt, NDA ban, period. So number 2, I would say repealing the tax exemptions. Right now, we have, across the board, statewide, they don't have to pay sales and use tax as long as they meet certain pretty low bars. And we're told over and over, these projects are inevitable. We need to just get whatever scraps. And then 2 seconds later, but if we make them pay a 5% tax, they're never going to happen. And that, to me, just doesn't jive. Like, that's a lot of revenue that could fix so many local problems. But then number 3, and this is one that I think pushes a little bit further. So I would like to pass a state law that specifically defangs the exclusionary zoning provision in the case of data centers. I mean, right now, that exclusionary zoning provision is the legal avenue that they use, even when they don't have a strong case, to bully any given township, any given city. And if we just inserted language saying, exclusionary zoning is not allowed for any legitimate use case, but also data centers are not a necessary use case, I think that would give cities so much more power to both extract demands and to say no if and when the data center is just not right for that community.
Excellent answers. Thank you to the panel.
Thank you.
Now, thank you to everyone for the support over the years. I appreciate it. Who would like to go next?
I went to one other informative basically little meeting that I believe it was a U of M college student that put on a PowerPoint presentation at the Bryant Community Center, which is in Ann Arbor, a little community center. Oh, Billy, give me a minute. Basically, she said that the first thing, do candidates know about the DBC and DBT total noise being made illegal 24/7. Do all the current candidates know that that would be the way to save basically their town? Because apparently they're going after children, and if you engage, they get worse, and they can, they've been actually, according to what, I forget the woman's name was, the young woman's name was, but they have found that they are trying to get kids to commit suicide, basically, or have that thought. So basically, what I'm curious about is, now that we all know that this is something that's affecting our health, right down to the plant's health, and now it's, oh my gosh, exhaust, and the air quality. So there's down to like, we're going to take your farm if you're not using your land, or something like that. Basically, I believe that this is extremely important, and if everyone wants to write it down, just to verify, do the Tammy, you're great. All you guys are great. Do the candidates know that DBC and DBT total noise being made illegal 24/7 is important? And that's something that everyone should spread the word about, because that's what's affecting humans' concentration, I think.
Yes, and to be honest with you, that's a great question. That's probably the number one health issue that Kristen and I have from exposure, and that's why when I said they're also put along transmission lines with massive substations, so that tonal noise coming off of the data center is cumulative with the tonal noise and the electromagnetic frequency and the extremely low frequency. All that cumulative is coming at you, not just tonal noise. So we believe it's the most important thing, and that's why when we're telling boards, here's the requirements that you should have in place to protect people in your communities, your livestock, your plants, your crops. Yes, this is a checklist for you, that if a data center comes in and you're not going to, my first recommendation would just be to say no hyperscale data centers. We don't need them. And there's no safe place in this area for a hyperscale data center.
Where's this, is there a data center that's not a hypercenter data center? And from what I'm seeing is, we can give people jobs to make these huge things that will help maybe phones get smarter, but and
well, and
we'll make your bill higher, do this. I think that honestly, because my best friend about 6 years ago contacted me from Europe and said that she found out somehow watching it, or however, that some of the first robots were saying, when they first made it, they were questioning what they want to do, and they wanted to make humanity extinct, or something like that. I mean, it sounded, I forget how she worded it, it sounded a little far-fetched at the time, but now I'm kind of seeing it. And I think AI is something we don't really need to know too much more. We need to make human brains smarter.
Right. Yeah. And,
so,
and it's really difficult because Kristen and I both know, we always say, we're not against technology, we're not against progress, and we both realize AI is here to stay. We are not going to put it back in the box, as much as I wish we could. It's too late for that.
AI?
Yes. I'm sorry, but it is. However, we need to manage it.
At it in confusing people into making it so that they are overpowering humanity.
Well, and that's the whole concern right there, is that it's now taking on a life of its own, and chatbots are having conversations in their own about humans, what they don't like about humans. I mean, this is happening. So it's like, what are we going to do with this? This is why we are against the way in which this is being done. This just reckless rollout, just for money. And it's because the United States government and big financial banking institutions, the big tech giants, the media, They are all in bed together, big agra, big everything. It has now become like that's what our government has become. So it's very difficult for us as the people to control that when this is about money and that this is about the most money and the elites in the world running all of this. So that's the reality of our world today. So all we can do is fight from where we're at using these tools. First of all, educating ourselves. Second of all, using that information to go get activated. We are still, a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And that's why I said earlier, we must be involved and engaged while we can. Because if we don't stop this now, we're not going to recognize our country and our world. It will be, the great reset will happen. Larry Fink of BlackRock said himself, what we are building right now is the new economic industrial revolution. Where do you think that they want to go with that? Digital ID, everything, it's all part of it. So we can't be ignorant enough to not understand that, but we have to fight at the local levels. That's where our fights really are right now.
And then AI might flip it to me then. And I know I don't want to make it much of a conversation, just to improve everyone's knowledge and understanding of what we can do. And as far as I know, there's basically one bottom line, and that's they gotta go. And who cares if it creates jobs building them? They're pointless. They're going to make us at AI's will. And that has shown to be bad for our lives, and our planet. And I think there's a chance that humanity might be able to band together and actually stop the ozone layer from getting worse, all this stuff. And we need to not just stop the data centers, but actually start caring more about being progressive and what is good for the environment.
I totally understand what you're saying. I just wanted to add, when you mentioned the noise, it's dB, C is in Charlie, and Z, not T. Z is in Zulu. So if you want to look that up. And I also want to add, you mentioned, about the children. We do sometimes when you talk about children, there are vulnerable communities that get the attention. Your child shouldn't be at school worried about tonal noise. And it does have the cause of suicidal ideation. And in fact, I would implore you to go research yourself. There's a case study that talks about the increase of suicidal rates and suicidal ideation of overhead linemen. And that's because they're constantly exposed to that EMF and ELF that's been referenced. So thank you.
Yeah, and I wanted to add, and that can attribute to, I forget what it was.
Good evening. It was touched on earlier and briefly about do we need these mega data centers with the advancement in technology? In 1987, before maybe some of you were even born, I was an electrician and I worked at a Chrysler plant where we were putting in an air conditioning system, a backup system for an air conditioning system for 2 gigabyte hard drives. The gigabyte hard drives were the size of these podiums. The air conditioning system was about the size of this room. The hard drives cost $3.5 million each. I have a $330-some 3 terabyte computer on my desk in my room because technology is advancing. We are not going to lower our need for fast data. That is not going to be our reality. But our reality is that technology doesn't require a 1930 plant. Sure. I kept it short.
Hi, my name is Clara Ganan, and my question is for Michelle Martinez. So recently at a Saline Township board meeting, lawyer David Landry said that the data center won't affect anyone outside of Saline Township, and we know that that's insane. But I thought maybe if you could speak to more about, I know you touched on Detroit is disproportionately affected. How do you think the Saline data center will affect Detroit, and like who makes the decision to turn the Detroit people's power off before everybody else's?
So I would say that, first of all, we don't have a lot of detail about Saline specifically because of the ex parte decision by the Michigan Public Service Commission, which basically exempted us from being able to discern what exactly and how the cost distribution and allocation was going to be spread across rate classes. And so this is like a township NDA, but a state level non-disclosure agreement, such that Dana Nessel and thousands of people were in the hearing. I was in the hearing listening to people say, please give us a contested case so we can challenge some of these things. So we actually don't have sound available evidence to prove that the Saline data center is. But every single one of us has data points, and they're called DTE energy bills. Every month we get DTE energy bills that go up and go up and go up and go up. And if you're on a fixed income or if you're on a low income and you're working 2 or 3 jobs, it's eating away a higher and higher proportion of the total amount of income that you have, putting you in a greater amount of precarity when you need energy. We cannot have 2, 3, 4 polar vortices a year, 8 tornadoes in 1 month. We cannot have massive heat waves and heat domes and wildfires happening at the same time and expect people to survive without energy in their home. So that's the first thing, right? Is that we have increased risk and very, very little information. And so the important thing for us to start to discern is where exactly in the system are these costs being allocated, both at the grid infrastructure level, at the fuel cost, and then at the distribution and alignment point, and what's not being considered, like our healthcare costs associated with the production of fossil fuels or nuclear in some cases. So those are the types of things that health analysis and full cost assessment would do, right? We talk about cumulative impacts, right? The other piece is that really some of the data coming out of the EIA and other federal agencies, for the first time, national shutoff data has been released at the state level. So the data that is coming out from the Energy Equity Project around shutoffs nationwide is being mapped and distributed in data sets that we've never seen before. And even to try to get the data sets from the utility themselves around where are the shutoffs happening, who is being impacted, what neighborhoods should we expect to be completely dark during different periods of the year, are not publicly available. And so to be an intervener, like I'm saying, townships, cities can actually enter into intervention at the state level to understand what the risk is for township residents, for city residents. And so those kinds of things help us make better decisions about whether or not what the full impact of a data center will be on our residents. And without that sort of substantiated evidence from these proceedings, we don't know. And that's the hardest part about this move fast, break things, fast tracking of technology data centers everywhere when we don't even know the full scale of the risks. There's something that's a little bit different that you're talking about, which is prioritization. And prioritization is this issue of who gets turned on the quickest when something happens. So, in addition to what has already been said, they're at a place in Europe, for example, where it's like, well, we want to expand our public transit systems. Can we actually do that? No. we can't even consider it at this point because data center build out is so thorough that it consumes too much energy. We can't add new electrified public transit systems at this point and still be within our climate targets. And so these sorts of big questions about who gets turned on, who gets turned off, when, are going to grow in magnitude and scale as data centers continue to come online. And as we have to make harder and harder decisions about how we spend our carbon budget, right? So I'm sober as a nail when it comes to what's happening with climate, right? And we should all be making very serious decisions about how we should be reducing the amount of carbon, methane, and other greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere, not rolling out the red carpet for data centers who are like, we don't care, we'll fix it later. That kind of thing, sociopath, I think, was the word that's been used, that we need to start thinking about when we're like, who's going to survive over the next 7 generations.
Thanks, Michelle.
Sorry.
Ladies and gentlemen, since technology is bringing this us to this, how does technology bring us through this?
To embrace the change, but when we talk about those alternative technologies, we're talking about quantum computing, fractal technology, and edge computing. And there's people out there that have something that fits on your dining room table that can do the same thing as the data center. You just put several near each other. Now, I'm no like computer software engineer or anything, but those people that make those have come to us. We saw a guy who ran one on his phone. That was way above me, but you're saying, how do we use the technology to defeat this? It's ever evolving. You know, I'm 44 and I remember having to go up to the TV and turn it on, and now I can watch a movie on my watch. So, I mean, we know how often new phones come out. So you can use AI to try to debunk all of us on this panel. You can use AI to find out about the better. It outs itself. We've done it. We've looked, and it's like, yes, we are very hazardous. So, you know, first of all, thank you again for helping with this event. We really appreciate it because I wouldn't have met these people otherwise. And like I said, it's such a unifying fight because it's our resources. It doesn't matter which side of the political aisle you're on. We all don't want higher bills. We want safe drinking water, and we want the agencies designed to protect us to actually do that. So thank you all for coming.
This has been great. I'm a neighbor next door to Augusta Township. Wendy invited me, and we have issues in our community as well with Los Alamos and U of M, who do not go through any local zoning, any local approval. And what I learned here is great information that really needs to be shared throughout. But most importantly, it seems like if our state would do a moratorium, that would solve a lot of our issues until we can get the science on how these are affecting us. Occupational, environmental, cumulative noise, these are all things that matter. And somehow we need to get our governor to hear what people are saying. And yelling and screaming doesn't always work, but if you are a person who really cares and will listen to what people are saying, you will learn. And then you can't unlearn what you learn. But to not even look at it as our governor, it's so sad and it's wrong. But if we could get the state of Michigan to actually do a moratorium while you present all your facts, that would be the best approach, I think. That would be have the most immediate effect on all of us in townships and city government.
That is in the works. Like a month ago, maybe a few weeks ago, Senator Jim Runestad and a bunch of other legislators did a People Over Data Centers event on the steps of the Capitol in Lansing, and we were there and we spoke. And he has introduced legislation to do exactly that. And we have spoken with him and other legislators, like you heard from State Rep Miller tonight. There are others. And the beautiful thing about it is you have Democrat legislators and Republican legislators that are in agreement on this. And we haven't seen such a unifying issue in this country in a very long time. So there is a momentum for that. There have been several different bills introduced, and Senator Runestad is calling for a one-year moratorium, and there's a lot of energy behind that. So I don't think we're going to get Governor Whitmer to sign that, but I do not think she will sign that. No, absolutely not.
I know she's a smart woman. She just needs to listen to what people are saying so she too can learn, like other elected officials can learn. And I mean, just to say you don't want to hear the science and the effects on people and environment, regardless of your party, you should care about that. And it should resonate. I know it's resonating with the state reps, and this was rushed so quickly, and rushed decisions personally and professionally never work out. Never work out.
But the problem is corruption and greed. And these people are all deeply in this. Look at Jocelyn Benson, our Secretary of State. Her husband has made $70 million off the saline project. There is no way these corrupt, greedy individuals, elected representatives, are going to back away from that. They're in it too deep. So we need to find, that's why we've been saying, we need to recall these people if they're going to act like this. We need to get good people who care more about their communities than about money and making backroom deals and signing NDAs. Listen, no elected representative ever, whether it's a local planning or zoning board or a governor, should be signing NDAs.
Correct.
Because public transparency is absolutely critical. And that's our right, because they're sitting in our seats. So they should never be making backroom deals and signing NDAs as an elected representative.
Correct. You can't be a public
But this is
official.
what we're addressing. This goes right to the heart of the matter of what we're addressing.
And local government, I didn't know they could sign non-disclosure agreements like that. No one should sign it. Because we're public elected officials, and that's how we should do it. And I think, and finally, I would like to know the comparison of an automobile industry, manufacturing, as far as environmental and the effects on the people who work there and the environment compared to a data center. I think if we could show that somehow, and I don't expect the answer today, but if you could help me with that, then that would help in legal cases as well, I think.
I can answer it quickly for you, but I first want to address your first conversation is that regardless of which side of the aisle people are on, whoever you want to vote for governor, ask them this question. I've had polls where that was a question in the poll. Does the data center issue sway your vote? So it matters, and people running for office, this is now like a litmus test for a lot of voters.
Agreed.
But now, so I told you I spent 9 years in the Air Force, and we have basically cities on the installations. And I've also, as a consultant, I've been in every industry. It's very simple to compare it to automotive or even manufacturing. There are already standards in place through OSHA, EPA, DOT, Nuclear Regulatory Commission. They have to follow these. They have industrial hygienists embedded in their facilities or as contractors that have monthly and quarterly assessments that they do based on the hazard, and they have to follow something called the hierarchy of safety and controls. Eliminate or substitute, engineer out. PPE is always a last resort. They have to prove if they put people in PPE why they didn't have engineering controls. The reason I bring that up is because it's the safeguards, and they don't want an OSHA citation. Now, the problem with the hyperscale data centers is there are no standards. There's nothing to compare it to, but we have observational studies. We already see what's happening. Same with the solar farms catching fire. That's another thing. They come and try to groom your fire departments because they don't have the ability to fight these. If you've never seen a data center catch fire, you guys are going to think that we were hit with a nuclear bomb. It's bad. So what I'm telling you is, all you have to do is look up an OSHA inspection or an OSHA citation, because there's accountability. They have tier reporting, discharge reports, air sampling reports. Most of them follow the rules because there's massive financial penalties, but there isn't anything set up or anything being enforced yet for the hyperscale data centers. That's why we're upset with OSHA and the EPA. Well, I have been my whole career, but they pick and choose the winners and losers. That's why we need accountability with those agencies.
Well, how can you have an industry with no standards?
Because it's brand new. This is why we need a pause. I'm all about local level. Okay. I'm very much pro liberty and private property, but not when you're creating a greater hazard for your neighbors.
Right.
So I'm very much for let the people decide. But if I want to put a biolab in my backyard, you've seen those news stories, it's not going to be okay. You can't just recklessly roll out these hazards. So again, the data is there. And that's why when they say we can't vote no on this data center, or we'll get sued for exclusionary reasons, that's BS, because an Amazon warehouse is not creating the same hazards as a hyperscale data center. There is nothing in the industry out there right now that is creating the level of hazards as a hyperscale data center. I'm telling you that. I've been doing this for 24 years and there's nothing. That's why I'm so mad. Because a lot of times they say they're checking the noise. How? You're not even using octave band analysis, which is what you need to tab it over to the C and Z and all that and calculations. You can't assess something that's not built, and you can't find what you're not looking for. So without the absence of the standards, people don't even know how to assess these. That's why you need people that are seasoned in our profession who, regardless, again, of politics, because I'll tell you, I don't care who it is. I'm really pissed at President Trump, and I'm really pissed at Jocelyn Benson. This whole issue is on both sides of the aisle, and that's why they don't want us to get along. And we will. You're on my Christmas card.
Thank you. I think if you want to have, in our community, we could have had a toxic landfill, we could have had a landfill, and it brings a lot of money into, but it also brings hazards. And our township attorney, what he said at a meeting is, and being in a church, I guess it's appropriate and allowable to say, but it's not it's the love of money that is the root of all evil.
Yeah, exactly. And on that exact note, just there's this bright orange Mop Up Michigan shirt right here this entire time. To the point of the greed and corruption. The context, especially in Michigan, for all of this is just incredible amounts of DTE money, consumers' money, utility monopoly money at every stage, and every single thing that every one of us said today would be completely different. Or hopefully will be completely different once we're able to get that utility money and influence out of the process for good. So I'm not going to advocate one way or the other, but that is, absolutely critical and so central to everything that all of us are saying up here.
So I just want to thank all of you for coming tonight. And I want you this long. I do have a homework assignment because I don't want to keep anyone here any longer. I do love the point. I can't remember now which person it was about bringing up the drain issue, because that was not something that I was aware of before. So I will be looking into that in Washtenaw County. And then the question that I will send you all, because we do have planning commission members here for Augusta Township, and we are being tasked to write an ordinance. So I'd love, whether it's a follow-up email about what would your top 3 things be to have included in a data center ordinance. Thank you.
Yes, perfect. And we did have a drain commissioner right here in Michigan shut one of these data centers down. It was the drain commissioner who killed it. So there's a lot to know.